Hello, and welcome to Celebrating Inclusivity, Girl Scouts in a Changing World. My name is Amy Hassett, and I'm a Girl Scout leader as well as a social worker. I'm so excited to bring this webinar to you today. And this webinar is one part of a three-part webinar series that's hosted by the New Jersey Girl Scouts Council. So thank you for joining us today. As we begin talking about celebrating inclusivity, what we're really going to be looking at is better incorporating inclusivity in Girl Scouts, as well as actually utilizing inclusivity to make the program better for all girls. So let's get started. As we begin talking about inclusivity, it's really important that we start with recruitment. And the reason that's important is because recruitment is really where it all begins. Who are we bringing into our service unit? We like to first start out with the idea of implicit bias. And oftentimes when we talk about implicit bias, people get very uncomfortable because implicit bias is referring to attitudes and stereotypes that are affecting our understanding, our actions, our decisions, and it happens in a completely unconscious way. So we're not aware of the implicit biases that we have. But oftentimes when people talk about bias, they feel like it's something very purposeful. Implicit bias just really comes from how we were raised, where we were raised, and what our experiences throughout our life have been. Who are we reaching out to? How are we reaching out to them? Is there a disability school in your district? Do you recruit there? Are there different schools that are socioeconomically challenged? Are you getting the same success reaching out to those schools as you are reaching out to other schools that may not have those same issues? So as we look at implicit bias, and I do this with a lot of mental health trainings I do, you can actually look at your own implicit bias through tons of websites online that ask you questions to get an idea of, what you do and why. But in general, as a group, as a service unit, you can effectively look at implicit bias by looking at what girls do you have as part of your service unit? Are there certain groups of girls that are not represented? And is that something that you have the ability or creativity to change? You also want to look at how you recruit. Recruitment isn't something that just comes from your recruitment team or your recruitment person. Every time you have a cookie booth, or every time you talk about Girl Scouts to a neighbor, or every time the newspaper covers one of your events, this is recruitment. So as you're doing those types of things, whether you're recruiting officially or unofficially, what does that look like? And are there ways that we can actually start opening up opportunities to girls, groups, and and populations that we're seeing underrepresented in our service unit? So starting with recruitment and the conversation around recruitment is one of the most important places that we can really make a difference as we're looking at inclusivity. Of course, as soon as we finish recruitment comes the difficult part, actually doing the troop organization. And I give troop organizers a ton of credit because you know what? I've been one and it's a lot of work. You're trying to convince people to take on more girls as you have more and more girls interested in the opportunity of Girl Scouts. And the truth is we don't do troop organization like many other organizations in our community. If you look at things like Boy Scouts, 4-H, or lots of other clubs and organizations, what happens is they bring in volunteers and then they dictate how those volunteers will put together their teams, troops, or groups. So you may have a volunteer come in for something like STEM Lego with 4-H as they make the different Lego robots. Now, they're going to take whichever kids, no matter the age, no matter the group, and they're going to take them and place them with the different volunteers. We don't do the same thing. As we do troop organization, we are so grateful, probably the most grateful of any organization, for anyone willing to volunteer. And we want those volunteers to stay with us and to be comfortable. So instead of dictating to them how we're going to end up giving them their girls, we give them the opportunity of choice. They choose where, when, and how many girls they're comfortable accepting. Are they accepting girls just from their church, just from their friends group? Are they taking girls off of our waiting list? And if they're not, why? A lot of times when we have new volunteers coming in, we like to have the conversations with them in which we look at what are the barriers for them to become a volunteer in Girl Scouts. Is it a time barrier? Is it a barrier that they don't think that they could be creative enough, or they're not really interested in going camping? And we help them see that there's so many options out there by looking at those barriers. Now, doing the same process with our current leaders in helping them determine what are their barriers for accepting new girls may help them understand where their concerns are and help them be able to reach outside of their comfort zone and bring in additional girls into their troops. We also allow a lot of troops to exist with very few girls, 3, 4, 5. And I know the goal right now is to try to have at least 12 girls in a troop. So as we're working with our volunteers, we need to set up a certain amount of understandings as people are coming in as volunteers, that this is your responsibility. And taking in new girls off the waiting list so there aren't girls not getting the opportunity at Girl Scouts is part of our job. So this is another great area in which working with troop leaders may allow us to reach out and meet the needs of far more girls than we're already meeting. Now, the girls we're getting in are much more diverse, especially nowadays, because diversity isn't just the normal things that we talk about: cultural diversity, socioeconomic diversity, things like physical disabilities. All of these things are what we come to expect when we talk about a diverse child. But diversity exists in every child we're getting. Do they have any invisible illnesses, mental health issues, learning disabilities? Do they come from a history of abuse? What's their family dynamic, their living conditions? And of course, we're even talking about things like gender dysphoria. What do they feel comfortable being? Who do they feel comfortable being? What are their religious beliefs, their values? All of these different things are going to affect who they are and how different they are from the other girls in your troop. And the truth is, as long as we try to put all of these girls into one box, we're never going to be as successful as truly understanding the diverse child and working well within, within those boundaries of understanding them and allowing them to be successful no matter how different they are. As we start to understand these diverse youth, we also have to understand that they're not the same as we were when we were growing up. Now, no matter how old we are as volunteers, whether we're, in our 30s, 40s, or more seasoned volunteers that were in Girl Scouts many decades ago, times have changed, and technology is a huge component of that. Nowadays, the phones that these youth have in their pockets are more powerful than any computer many of us had growing up. And the ability for people to bully and be anonymous is a true threat to our girls. We recognize that technology can be something that is so successful and something that is so difficult. And we even have badges and journeys that focus on how technology is affecting our youth. We also have to recognize that the school to prison pipeline is something that is really real. As we look at our school to prison pipeline, it's stuff like the fact that 70% of all in-school arrests, the students are Black or Latina. And students that are Black or brown are 3.5 times more likely to have a suspension than any of their peers. We also see that 25% of foster kids are incarcerated after they leave foster care systems at 18. So there are certain groups of students that are more at risk for having issues in their school community and with their peers as well as with their authority figures, just based on who they are and their diversity. Now, anything on this page, I'll be honest, we could do a training on by itself. And ACEs is one of those things that could truly use its own training. For anybody who has never heard of ACEs, ACEs was a study that happened between 1995 and 1997. And it looked at 17 1,000 youth. And in looking at these youth, what they tried to determine is, based on their experiences, based on their household, based on their parents, based on their socioeconomic standing, their abuse history, were they more at risk for something called toxic stress? Now, what they were finding is that with all of these different components, all of these adverse childhood experiences, which is what ACEs stands for, these youth were more and more at risk for not just mental health issues, but physical health issues. Things like obesity, addiction, heart disease, cancer. And the more adverse childhood experiences that they had, the more likely they were to even have a 20-year less life expectancy than peers that didn't go through similar situations. So if you have the opportunity, looking at something like ACEs really does give you some insight into where some of your students are coming from. We also look at diversity through things like mental health issues. And some of that comes from the fact that we see that 50% of all lifetime mental health issues begin before the age of 14. 75% of all mental health issues are beginning by the age of 24. And mental health problems like anxiety are seen in children as young as 5 and 6 years old. Because so often when we look at mental illness, we think of mental illness as something that's, a much older issue, when truly mental illness just comes down to the way your brain processes information, like anything else. And it's very similar to its physical illness counterpart. When you have that small child that's afraid for mommy to go away, that has separation anxiety, those are the beginnings of things like anxiety. And with these mental health issues, we have a true opportunity to teach children not just how to focus on, the situation at hand, but how to better process information as they get older as adults. So right now, all of these things are facing our youth. And we as leaders who are sometimes, sometimes teachers, sometimes confidants, sometimes parents, we as leaders need to be more trained, more open, and more prepared than we ever have before, because suddenly we're getting groups of diversity that we've never had to face that may be very different from our own diverse experiences. So as we're working with these youth, we need to understand that their perspective makes a huge difference. So what is perspective? Of course, when we see a group of girls that are all the same age, the same grade, maybe even the same school, we assume their perspectives are the same. The reality is, perspective so affects the diversity of these youth. When we look at the two girls in this picture, what do they see? And who's right? How many mountains does the first girl see? 3? The other girl can only see 1 because her mountain is so huge, it overshadows the others. Neither of these girls are right or wrong. It just is. Because their perspectives aren't something that we can necessarily pass judgment on, but it's just something we have to understand and accept. Their perspectives may even be different than our own perspectives because we all come from different places. But truly utilizing and understanding different people's perspectives allow us to truly create a really worthwhile and full amazing team. And that's really what our troops are. We can use all of these different perspectives to build a different type of troop dynamic. And the troop dynamic is something that's really going to make what we're doing as a troop be meaningful to each of these girls and not just girls with similar perspectives. So when we're building a new troop, we need to get to know our girls, and we also need to get to know their families. Sometimes we get frustrated because the girls and the families may not follow our rules, may not follow our expectations. And in a few slides, we're going to talk about how to address this. We also need to understand the idea of girl-led. And the thing is that that's existed in Girl Scouts for a long time, but now we can utilize girl-led in a completely different way. If we allow each girl to help lead the troop, what we're doing is allowing their perspective to help guide the troop to be able to see things so they feel a sense of ownership, a sense of inclusivity. Are we allowing our girls to plan and run meetings? Are we having a hard time sitting back and letting them make mistakes and having to fix them? And are we finding different opportunities for leadership that matches what the girls are able and willing to do? In doing all of these things, we help not only build up the girls to be better leaders for tomorrow, but we allow them to understand that their perspective is valued. And we allow them to be able to show their perspective in a unique way to all of the other girls that are around them. The more we value them, the more they will truly feel a part of the organization. We sometimes say that making a good team is the same stuff that makes a good recipe. Think about if you're making a cake. Your milk, your eggs, your butter, your flour, they all come from very different places. And they all come from very different situations. You're not going to get your eggs from the same place you get your milk. And honestly, our girls are just that different. They're coming from different experiences, different places, but everything they put into the recipe is what's going to create a truly good and powerful troop. So it's important for us to recognize that as we're building our teams, that we need to appreciate the differences of all of our members, because utilizing our families, utilizing our girls' differences are going to make a more well-rounded troop. And let's utilize our families. Sometimes families make working with girls harder because they have different rules and they may not be comfortable with the way we lead. And there's going to be different power struggles. But if we build relationships with the families right up front, as soon as we get the girl, then we can utilize the families based on their strengths. Do you have a mom who's a photographer? A dad who's a chef? Do you have somebody that might be able to come in and teach girls how to build a website or sew badges on their vests? Recognizing and utilizing families, building those relationships, also allow us to see our girls in a totally different way. How are we running our meetings? Are we talking to the girls? Are we talking with the girls? Are we giving them a true chance? Sometimes for these kids, they may not feel comfortable sharing who they are at school. They may feel quiet, or they may feel like they don't necessarily have a voice in other places throughout their life. And the truth is, this is a safe place for them, a safe place that grows with them as they get older. So even if their classes change, even if their schools change, they have sisters, they have a leader, they have trusted adults, they have all of these things that are protective factors in place for them so that they can truly find success. So as we're working with them, are we just teaching from a journey book or telling them the different components they need for a badge? Or are we talking with them and letting them discover and figure things out on their own? The more they're able to truly be part of the conversation and help drive the conversation, the more the conversation is going to actually stay with them. Because think about if you're in a situation where somebody's talking to you, how much do you remember from that actual situation? How much do you remember from trainings where you're spoken to? Now, I know I'm saying that as I'm doing a webinar in which I don't have any feedback and people talking back to me, which makes me a little sad. But in the same respect, when you're actually part of the conversation, if we were all sitting in a room together and discovering these things together, would it be different? So it's important that even as we're doing webinars like this, that we take things from this webinar back to our group and we actually touch them and experience them. Because touching, experiencing, feeling, being part of something allows it to truly have more meaning for us. We need to recognize that sometimes when we're in a situation where we're working with kids, We want obedience. We want the kids to follow the rules, to do the right thing, to make the right choices. And sometimes we can get them to do that, but it's more successful if we teach them respect, because then they're not doing it because they have to. They're doing it because they want to. And oftentimes where these kids are coming from, the rules aren't the same. Not at school, not at home, and not at Scouts. So especially for younger kids, this may be a conflict in their own head. We want to allow them to feel as if this is something that they can have ownership of, that they can be part of it, that they are truly respected and valued. And we also want to create opportunities for equity. And I know oftentimes we talk about creating opportunities for equality, but I think as we're looking at diversity, equity is so much more important. When we look at equality, we're giving every girl the same thing. And the truth is, not every girl needs the same thing. And what girls need something more this week may need less next week. And there may be other girls that need more. So recognizing what our girls' needs are, what our girls' strengths are, allow us as a leader to actually provide equity over equality. We may know that we have certain girls that are great focusing on things like community service. Other girls may be awesome at camping and rock wall climbing and doing all of the different, canoeing and zip lining. And there may be some girls that can't even get past the fact that the bug net has a bug on it. So the support we provide certain girls during community service projects is going to be completely different than the support we give to certain girls that aren't outdoorsy people. So as we provide equity, we recognize that not all kid is going to be good at the same thing. I personally love the bottom cartoon in which they say, for fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. We know that the monkey is going to be quite successful, but everybody else is going to get to that in a completely different way. And they may feel completely lost, and they may feel as if they're being set up to fail. And the truth is, whether they're in school or at home, there are so many situations like this for our youth. If we give them the opportunity to understand that they're not being tested on just one thing, but no matter what it is they're going through, we're going to help them be successful and help them reach the goals by understanding who they are and what they're good at, it's going to build a completely different thing. It's not going to be a club. It's going to be a family. And it's going to be a family that teaches these girls the tools that they need to truly be leaders of the future. As we start working with these girls in all of these different capacities, we do understand that there is going to be some difficulties. As we start looking at the diverse components of children and we start trying to work on things like respect over obedience, we're going to come into some problems sometimes, and some girls are going to have, challenges. So we need to recognize that we as leaders need to be prepared to support them. One of the first things that I like to look at are things like conflict management. And this is a great tool. The Wheel of Choice is something that I've used for years in social work working with kids. What it comes down to is, as we're looking at conflict management, there are so many other opportunities outside of things like mediation. So you see two girls fighting, you pull them to the side, you mediate, you figure out what to do, or you tell them to not talk to each other, and conflict is done until the next conflict. But by giving the girls choices of how to handle their conflict, not only are they handling that conflict in the moment, but they're handling their conflict when they get to school the next day and have a conflict, or when they have a problem with a sibling, or when they have a problem with a job as they're getting older. So teaching them how to manage conflict is actually a great tool for their future success. And as we look at the Wheel of Choice, we see lots of different options. Things like, are you able to talk to this person in an open way? Is that the kind of friend this is, that you can make that judgment call and tell them how you feel? Do you need to calm down and count to 10 before you open up and talk to them? Is this something that we need to put on the agenda and talk to the whole group about, so we're not necessarily just calling out one person? Are we teaching them how to use things like I messages and I statements? And before I can actually hear eye rolls for people who've been taught I statements, because if you haven't been taught I statements right, when I was taught I statements in college, I was like, I statements. I feel that they sound so contrived. They don't sound like us, but they can. Because what an I statement truly is not putting somebody else on the defensive by using things like blame. Instead of saying, you have to stop coming into the meeting and just sitting, down and not helping out, saying, I would really appreciate if we can all work together, because it just seems like only a few kids are helping in the beginning, and it would be great if everybody pitched in so we could get started faster. That's all an I statement is. So as we look at the fact that a lot of our kids are using the word you, and it's automatically putting other kids on the defensive, that I statements can actually be a really successful tool. As we look at things like the wheel of choice, we understand that many times somebody may have to ask for help because they may not know what the right thing to do is. But as they work with conflict management over and over again, they're going to become more successful. Problem solving is part of conflict management, but it also is kind of its own thing. When we look at problem solving, I want you to go back to your 8th grade math class when you got a problem that was confusing and difficult and challenged you. When we look at the problem solving method, it's not just about, dealing with the conflict. It's about understanding the problem. And sometimes problem solving has to occur before true conflict management can be successful. So you may do what you think is right for conflict management, and if it doesn't work, you may have to go back and really analyze what the situation is. So start with, what's the problem? What's going on? What happened? And what significant components of the problem truly stand out? As you analyze the problem, you want to look at what happened. How did the problem present itself? And what occurred as that problem, happened either between the two girls or between the troop or between the families? What actually occurred? And after you look at the problem and look at what occurred, what can you do about it? What are some of those options that we saw in that conflict management wheel of choice? Try to implement what you think would best work for that particular problem, and implement it with fidelity. So for instance, don't come up with new rules every time you hit that same problem. Try doing the same thing in that particular situation with that particular person. And then after you've done it a couple of times, evaluate it. Because if it didn't work, you may need to change your response. So as you're taking the girls through this option of problem solving, it's no different than them doing a math problem. But it'll allow them to see their world and their problems in a way in which they actually feel like they can solve them or change them. If the problem-solving methods and conflict management processes aren't working, you still have another option: using our resources wisely. Ask for help. There are other leaders that have probably had similar situations as you're facing with these particular kids. And maybe they have ideas that you haven't thought of yet because of their experiences and their perspective. So recognize that even if you've used the different things that we've discussed in this webinar, that you still have the options of talking to the different kids, parents, talking to the different kids, and talking to the different troops that are around you to come up with ideas that you may not already have. As we start to recognize the fact that challenges are going to happen, but we can deal with them, make a commitment. Make a commitment to having a truly diverse and inclusive troop. Because in doing that, we're allowing the troop to become something so much more than what it was before. We're recognizing that inclusivity is not something we have to create. It's already there. But we need to start to notice it. We need to appreciate it And we need to make sure that as we're utilizing the inclusivity, as we're utilizing the diversity, that, that in doing that, we're truly creating something that allows us to make something that's going to truly last for these girls. That it's going to be something that these girls are going to be able to feel like, even if they have other clubs, other organizations, other activities, that they still want to be part of, because it's something that truly allows them to be who they are, to expand who they are, to appreciate who they are, and to figure out how to be who they are in a way outside of our troop. Because they're not necessarily going to have this kind of safe opportunity in other places, in other ways. Now, we've talked a lot about how individual troops can utilize inclusivity. And the truth is that it's not just about what we're doing at the troop level. We can do a lot of different things at the service unit level too, at the council level. As we're looking at celebrating inclusivity, what we can actually do is take what we're doing with our troop and expand it. Is our service unit planning diverse activities? Are you doing the same activities every single year? And are you doing activities that girls haven't shown up at in several years because they're not activities that interest our girls? Are we utilizing girl-led at the service unit level? Are we looking at the different activities that exist and seeing that only certain girls are getting there? Why? Are we considering things like cost, parent needs, youth interest, location accessibility, level of sensory information if we have students that can't handle that, skills, abilities, fears, beliefs? All of these things affect a truly successful service unit plan. Are we allowing our kids to be part of new and different activities that may not have worked years ago, but may work now based on who we currently have in our service unit? And are we setting up expectations for new and old leaders to truly not just celebrate inclusivity, but make it something that's just part of the conversation? Not just the activities they're doing, not just the way they're recruiting, not just the way they're building their team, but how they see their community, how they reach out to other troops, and how they understand their place in the world. Are we supporting diverse activities that already exist in our community? Are we showing our youth things outside of what they already get the opportunity to be part of? And are we looking for opportunities for them to feel as if they're getting an experience that's actually going to be long-standing and make a difference in who they become as an adult? We want to make sure that we're also trying to push those comfort zones again. So for instance, I had a girl who was very nervous about rock climbing. And in my troop, the rule is we never say we can't. We tell them to just put on the rock climbing, pieces and go up one level. And each time, maybe do a different level and see how far you can push yourself. Well, this one particular girl was very nervous. She got up the first level, the second level, and would come back down. Well, eventually she pushed herself, got to the top, and was terrified. And it took a couple of us about a half an hour to finally get her down successfully. When she hit the ground, she immediately said, "I want to do it again." Because she made it. She did it. She was successful. But she never would have done that had she not had those opportunities that were outside of her comfort zone. This is what we're providing our girls. We're providing them true opportunities to be able to not just learn, but grow. We talk about courage, confidence, and character. But the truth is that what Girl Scouts truly provides is an education outside of what they're already receiving from their parents and schools. And if we can do that in a meaningful way and touch them in ways that other people aren't, recognize, appreciate them in ways that other people aren't, we're truly creating an organization in which these girls are going to end up not only being successful now, but having the tools they need to be the leaders that we're going to need tomorrow. We are what's called a supportive factor. We live in a day and age where currently mental health issues, as we said, are affecting our kids, and we're losing children to suicide. We recognize the fact that in our country, suicide is the second leading cause of death for children. Children are being bullied by anonymous figures around their community, and they're having to face challenges and expectations and that we don't even understand. As soon as we figure out what's going on with them, it's changed and it's new and it's different. And we're just trying to keep up. Things like Girl Scouts is called a supportive factor. We talked about adverse childhood experiences earlier, and with adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress, supportive factors are the one thing that help to combat that. Supportive factors are things like community. Supportive factors are things like having constants in your life, having a supportive adult that you can trust and talk to, having a routine that's healthy, learning about healthy ways of living, healthy food, healthy exercise. All of these things are supportive factors. And all of these things save the lives of children. We as leaders are not just teaching them a skill. We as leaders are not just teaching a new generation of girls to put up a tent or go down a zip line. We're actually helping them to get past the things that are going to make their lives more difficult. And we're helping create leaders that are truly going to be able to face all of the difficulties in our world and maybe finally make a real dent in them. You are important in the lives of children. And this all starts with understanding them and appreciating them for who they are. Inclusivity isn't just a matter of checking off boxes and making sure that we have a diverse population. It's a matter of being the consistency that allows these children to be who they are and accept who they are and be successful just being who they are. And in a current world that's as divided as it is, it's important that we are part of that future. Not just to have better families and a better community, but ultimately to build a better future for our girls. Thank you for being here with me today. And I look forward to seeing the future of New Jersey Girl Scouts as being more diverse, more inclusive, and more successful. Thank you.